It's just after I see a movie, I like to go get a piece of pie and talk about it. It's sort of a little tradition I have. Do you like to get pie after you see a good movie?
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Queer Film Podcast. I am here with my contributors Matthew and Max. Hello boys.
Hey.
Hi again, Brian.
We are wrapping up our Pride Month with probably two of our more obscure queer films, at least as compared to the other ones we've been doing. Gus Van Sant's Mala Noche and Todd Haynes' Poison. Both of these, like we did with Reservoir Dogs and Hard Eight, we are pairing these two auteurs' first films together to discuss them. They are both directors that we've discussed before on the podcast, and they've been very influential, and they're two of my favorites, so I'm excited to talk about them. Let's get started with Mala Noche, which is based on a novella. So the whole story was that Gus Van Sant had directed a movie before, but it never got released. And he was living in the Pacific Northwest and met Walt Curtis, who had written this book and wanted to make it into a film. And he shot it for $25,000, and it looks it. And it's become sort of this queer. It's known as sort of the new queer cinema. It's the start of a new queer cinema, especially in hindsight.
Yeah, Brian, I've been looking forward to covering these for a while. I think I talked you into that we needed 4 episodes for June, and so we still needed some extra films to cover by the end of this month, and I'm glad that we're getting into the ones that are art with a capital A. And Mala Noche, it was a few years before new queer cinema. It was one that I hate to say flew under the radar, even though that it had a pretty well-known reputation with a lot of other artists, and especially West Coast artists at that time. But, was really ahead of a lot of films.
This was my first time seeing either one of these films. Had you seen this before? Either of you?
No. And I feel like actually I'm missing a whole lot of context with Mala Noche because, it's one of those things that slots in pretty well with what I know of Van Sant's style. It's kind of got a precursor to this 90s slacker dude, aestheticism that you would even see in like something like Clerks or something. Not Van Sant, but for Van Sant, like Paranoid Park. It's got a very similar kind of bro-ish character as the romantic conqueror in this movie. And it's something that you sort of see in a lot of gay bodice rippers, to use a phrase. But what I was so stunned by in Mala Noche was just how completely antagonistic it was. It's not an easy film to like, I think. I would very much be curious to hear what you guys thought of it or received of it, just sort of impressionistically. But it's about this guy. Well, I'll defer to Brian for the full plot summary because I don't think I can give a neutered or charitable plot summary of this one.
I think it's just a slice of life sort of story of this, what is it, like a week in this guy's life, and he is the prototypical 90s slacker. Yes, he feels like a character out of Clerks or a character out of Stranger Than Paradise or Suburbia, Richard Linklater's film. It's of that sort of theme with these queer undertones. Obviously the lead guy is gay and is in love with is it Johnny? He's in love with Johnny. And Johnny is like an 18-year-old Mexican kid who apparently has emigrated to the Pacific Northwest, and Walt has moved to the Pacific Northwest, and Walt has met him and lusts after him and connives his way into his life in really creepy ways. And then weirdly, almost kind of gets him killed. And then the movie's over. And it's not an easy movie to like. He's not an easy character to like. It does feel also of a piece with The Living End, in the sense that it is that DIY sort of, we're making this because we have to. It was 1986, so AIDS was very much a going concern, but it's not mentioned at all. And so, but it is very much of a piece with The Living End, in that it's these creators spitting in the face of society.
Well, what's so funny about this one too is it feels so. It feels so of a thread with French New Wave movies, in that it's about this guy prowling the sidewalks, doing this interior monologue, talking about this object of his affection that he's pursuing, and who doesn't really want him. And so there's romance sort of framed as the sexual conquest, and he's got this whole sort of pseudo-poetic interior monologue, but in this case he sounds like a surfer bro. So and of course the movie is just filled with him having like the gringoest Spanish imaginable. So he'll be walking down the sidewalk in his jacket, and you'll hear his inner monologue going like, oh, I bet he was telling all of his friends about how he had fucked this puto gringo. And it's you're just like listening to this, and it's really hard not to. Another aspect of it is that he is aestheticized to be like a dumbass, right? He's sort of carrying this Bill and Ted energy with him, with such a heavy sort of dumb guy accent that is not extended to the romantic objects of affection in the movie. For lack of a better phrase, the Mexicans in the movie, who are the people that he lusts after, and there's this weird racialized, exoticized thing going on there. But it seems like so deliberate to paint him out as this kind of, meandering dumbass. And I just wonder how much, what that serves for the point of the movie, a movie that depicts this romantic conquest as largely unrequited and kind of predatory. And I don't know. I was wondering what your interpretations of that were, what your just reception to it was.
All good points, Matthew. And I've got to agree with both you and Brian. This is just kind of maybe a test run for Drugstore Cowboy and My Own Private Idaho directly after this. He was about to get much better. He was about to clarify his ideas. He was about to find his own styles in between then. But it's also pretty telling that it's more autobiographical of where his interests were for his first 3 movies, which were really hot hustlers. It's kind of funny to me that this is where Gus Van Sant came back to Portland, was that funny, in opposite to Todd Haynes, he didn't start off in the art world. He went to Hollywood, and then he worked on Madison Avenue. So he was working on much more cheap and commercial type of ventures before he got frustrated enough to want to become a real artist and move back to Portland. And so I do think there's a little bit of that first artist statement, and that, that as Brian mentioned, that he met the author, in a Portland bar and probably had a drunken or drugged up conversation of like, that'd be a great idea for a movie, dude. And, I know exactly how to do it. I've been watching so much Jean-Luc Godard. I've been watching so much French films as of late. And so there's a little bit of kind of the creaky first film here in those ways, because I don't think that he had fully found his voice yet, but was soon about to, again, by visiting the same themes. So I think this one is a bit creaky and very much of its time. But I also, on this second viewing, have an appreciation that it's not apologetic. It's not trying to ask for any sympathy. It's not empathetic. It's very much of an artist being like, I'm going to do this book and do it my way. And it's not going to be a movie for anybody else but that, or for me. But I think that it stayed so unknown for so long kind of proves that point.
Well, what's so interesting about it to me is that, and what prevents it from being something that I feel like I can write off or dismiss as, capital P word problematic, or just kind of like weird and predatory and shoddy, is that fact that the movie seems really conscious about painting its main character, Walt, this like street prowler, this white guy who owns a convenience store, who is like hunting after Johnny, this sort of mostly like a kid whose interiority we don't really see, and who seems largely uninterested in Walt. And Walt pursues him. He tries to coerce him with money. Like he comes out looking like a bad guy, frankly. But I think that, you can tell a lot about a director and their intention by the way that they externalize their main character's sort of personality and beliefs into the world. So you look at something like Todd Phillips' Joker, right? Which is supposed to be this misanthrope story, but the whole world, the point of it is that Arthur is like completely justified in his misanthropic outlook, because the whole world is just mean to him. And you can tell that the director is projecting so much shit onto the world, because he's like, this is what the world looks like through my eyes. In Mala Noche, that's not really the case. You have the main character who is this like really weird kind of like evocation of 90s slacker skater dude, kind of dimwit, who is like head up in the clouds, thinks he's a Godard character. But the world outside of him is not that ludicrous. It's not caricatured. It seems pretty like true to life, and it's got a good bit of verisimilitude. And I mean, the way that he directs Johnny and his friends, I think there's a point to the fact that we don't see really their interior lives at all, and they don't seem. I mean, I feel like in a more conventional like Bodice Ripper, it would have been, Johnny falls madly in love with Walt because he is, swept away by Walt's charisma or poetics or something. That's totally not the case in this movie. Johnny's like, all right, dude, I guess that's also open to interpretation. But I guess what I'm saying is I didn't see that sort of pretentious affect that Walt carries around with him reflected into the world. So that's why I have to wonder, is like, how much of making Walt this pretentious, kind of like condescending, patronizing douchebag, like what was the point of that in this movie, if not to make some kind of conscious statement? And that's what I'm wondering, because I don't think it's as easily discardable as, oh, this is just the invisible biases of the author slipping into it. I think Gus Van Sant is doing something with it. I just have no fucking idea what.
I think he's channeling like William S. Burroughs, and is like, because his next movie, like, William S. Burroughs is in Drugstore Cowboy, so he's obviously a fan. It is, yeah. I think that's the point. It is that kind of sort of literary misanthropic sort of character, And like I said, like Joker's a good example. Slacker by Richard Linklater, like I mentioned before. Clerks, even. All of these movies kind of have that kind of aggressively just male sort of point of view. With Mala Noche, it's a gay male, but he's no better than any of them. And I really think that this is just sort of Gus Van Sant. Max, you said trial run. Because a lot of stuff that he does really well later shows up in here, sort of. And there are some really beautiful shots, but it is a hard movie to like, and it's a hard character to like, and it makes it a hard movie to watch.
Mm-hmm. Well, and so much that I think will be in his masterpiece, My Own Private Idaho, a few more years later, which is then welcomed by the art house scene with open arms. Whereas surprisingly, and I suppose this one helped its non-reputation, but it was rejected from the first Sundance Film Festival. And I know that we'll get into Poison later and its success there, but that this really kind of was shut out of a lot of festivals at its time and became its own undercover, chapbook novel. It speaks to the feel of the film already. But Matthew, to your question too of, what is the director's point when you've got kind of this, pretentious dickbag as your main character, but the movie's still kind of having it both ways is, well, I think Gus Van Sant identified a lot with Walt. And that's why I think he identified with the book, and the guy that he met in the bar was just like, oh man, I definitely idolize and colonize and feel this way about all these hustlers in the street, but I'm going to make fun of myself while I'm doing it too. So I'm going to let the airs out of the tire, even if I'm still going to tell this story. How successful, I think, is up to a lot of people's tastes, or how we see it in, 2021 as well. But this is where I'm glad that the movie is pretty short, because I do think another 20 to 30 minutes would make it completely unbearable.
So you think it is definitely like in the realm of self-parody or something? Because I mean, that's the other thing, is like, what tone does this movie strike? Because a lot of it, like, without this caricature of a main character, yeah, a lot of it could be just this art house experimental sort of, treatise on intimacy and power and desire and all this stuff. And a lot of the ways that I see people like on Letterboxd writing about this movie is about like the undeniability of desire and all of this stuff. And it makes me feel like I'm an insane person, because I'm like, yeah, but that feels like it's not the point. Like, it feels like the point is something that is less to do with homosexuality. Granted, I mean, that's to ignore, I guess, the historical context of it. But I felt like the main character was such a caricature that it was impossible to focus on, his relationship with Johnny as anything other than this weird, fucked up power dynamic. Because I mean, and it's not just the sort of character that people will critique and say that there's like, these certain biases or ideology underlying their actions. Like, it's not like, I don't know, to me, it's not like a Holden Caulfield kind of character where you could see him as, virtuous or of an age or just kind of stupid. However, you look at it, it's really undeniable that this guy is supposed to be an asshole. He says things like, he's in the car with Johnny and Johnny's like speeding. He calls him like an ignorant Mexican. He says like, oh, these ignorant Mexican boys are always driving their cars way too fucking fast. And there's like, he says something also about like, these Mexican guys are never very smart, otherwise they wouldn't be here in the first place. Like, and he says this all with this like dude affectation. So there seems to be something that is just so blatantly
comedic about it.
Yeah. I mean, so you think it is like deliberate parody?
At the end, when the cops shoot him, when they shoot Johnny, his response is, well, you shouldn't have done that. Like, I don't remember what he said exactly, but like, no, they shouldn't have shot him. Like, he didn't do anything wrong. So he's that kind of person that's like, well, it was your fault. So he's not a good dude. He's not someone that you want to spend, like, you wouldn't hang out with that guy.
To me, Walt is somebody that would like shoot you a message on Grindr and you would get douche chills from like the first letter. Like, just, he's so gross. There's like nothing sympathetic about him unless you view him as like an outward like satire, that he's too ridiculous to be true, which I feel like has to be the case because nothing else in the world screams, it seems to fall in line with this like personal philosophy.
I don't think that Gus Van Sant has a sense of humor about himself. I really think that this is I don't think it's parody is what I'm saying. I think that he identifies with this person and with the guy that, that he met at the bar. Like, and he's expressing that. And he's like, it's a weirder, more predatory type of individual, but it feels very sort of autobiographical is what I'm saying.
It doesn't approach parody, and it certainly isn't pastiche, which is what Poison, will be when we talk about it next. But I do think that he is puncturing both this autobiography of this book and this movie, and calling to attention how directors take advantage of the people that they shoot and that they desire themselves. But it's so unformed, it is hard to take seriously, I think, when we're looking back at it right now. It is something that is a little bit more stuck in 1986. Again, he was watching Godard films, which are, a lot of them are sexist nightmares. He was obviously watching, as Brian said, Jim Jarmusch, Stranger Than Paradise. Those characters aren't nice. They're racist. They're full of bigotries and other things. But that was also part of the movement, I think, of a lot of the independent film in the 80s, was to be kind of like, let's show more ambivalent assholes on screen. We don't need the psychopaths as much anymore, this and this. We can show real people in all of their forms and, that they're kind of assholes, but they see themselves as heroes in their head, or, attempt to show more complicated characters. Whether Walt is complicated or not, I think at this point, rather than being kind of a little bit more of our two-dimensional stoner doofus, I think is up for debate, which we're having right now.
It almost reminds me, because I'm like a really big fan of, stories about misanthropes, because I think at their best, they can just be like dripping with this weird kind of dramatic irony where, you get sort of the double pleasure of watching somebody behave like an asshole, but also kind of like the spectatorial like righteousness of, if the movie is done right, you know that you're laughing at this person, right? And that they're like the great tragedy of their characters that they don't realize that they are their own problem. And I feel like you see that a lot in like Daniel Clowes, I can never pronounce his last name, the cartoonist. I believe he's originally from Chicago. He did Ghost World. He did a bunch of other stuff. I feel like he does those characters really well. And he has this one comic called Wilson that is entirely that. It actually got a film adaptation with Woody Harrelson, I think, a couple years back. It was not a great movie. The comic is fantastic because the whole point is you follow this asshole around, and all of the jokes are kind of like at his own expense, at the expense of other people. So you just follow him behaving like a jerk, like a total, Reddit commenter at times, and talking about how everybody in the world is the problem. But the broader sort of like picture is, it emerges that he is comically unaware of how much all of his problems stem from himself. And I feel like I kind of got a sense of that from Mala Noche, is this sort of weird dramatic irony that, Max, you said it was like not fully formulated, but it's what keeps this in my head rather than, just something that I, watch and throw away. I do think it's fascinating, like whatever the hell Gus Van Sant is doing here.
That's his fabled ambiguity and ambivalence, I think, that's really first showing itself, and a lot of building blocks. Obviously, again, the trial run for his next few. But I do think that powers this movie to this day. I would rather watch this 10 more times than I would watch Taxi Driver again, honestly. Even for all the technical aspects of that film, like I've got no interest in that explicitly being the hero, that this murderous, psycho asshole is very explicitly the hero by the end of this, rather than this, which is just kind of like, this guy's a screw up, he's very unself-aware. He's definitely pretentious, but, he's got one thing on his mind and he's going to try to do it.
I mean, even the expression of desire is like funny. It feels like parody of like, you know, gay machismo of like, oh, you know, if I'm pursuing him, it's fine, it's poetic and it's Godard. But you know, if he flips the script and he's the one who tops me, it's suddenly, you know, this big emasculating thing. It turns into a treatise on how Mexicans are all sexually aggressive. It's like it's such a weird it's such a weird inner monologue. And I feel like that's another thing that you see in like in Paranoid Park is you have a monologue that has even kind of like the sound. It's got like a weirder tenor than you would expect. It's very mumbly. It's kind of like, and that's something that I don't know. I mean, just on the level of watching it, it made it a hell of a lot more engaging.
There is a lot of bottom shaming just in general in the community. And I think that some of that monologue is just coming from that. Yeah, that was honestly my read of it. I was like, he's bottom shaming.
Well, unfortunately, I think a lot of these stay a lot more relevant or white guy mentalities and gay white male mentalities than we'd like to admit. You know, I know Brian works off of Halstead, but I worked out of Hydrate nightclub for 6 years too. And the racism of Halstead is never going to go away. And that's always going to be an issue. And in some ways, it feels like it's almost gotten worse. So there is some ways where it's just kind of like, oh, good. I'm glad this movie stays in 1986 and this, and that. And then I go, oh no, it really doesn't. Once you start to kind of pull the onion layers a little bit more. I guess the interesting thing about this one is that it was ahead of its time in a lot of ways, but didn't have the same notoriety that maybe our next film did, which, you know, was at the center of, you know, the culture wars of 1991. Yet in 1986, like you say, Brian, this one came at the height of AIDS and really hardly anyone made a peep, even if it, you know, was a hit with some critics. And I do think because it was one that wanted to completely take itself out probably of the modern, of the politics, of really saying anything other than, hey, here's this guy living in Portland and he really wants to have sex with a hustler.
Yeah, it feels very, like we talked about, trial run, because you can see a lot of My Own Private Idaho in this. Matthew, you mentioned those like sort of macho machismo characters from Paranoid Park as well. Like in a lot of ways, this guy's an early gay version of Good Will Hunting. Where he's just like this bum living his life, doing his thing, and has one thing on his mind, but his only, you know, Good Will Hunting is a lot smarter.
All right, Johnny, how do you like dem apples?
By the way, Matt, you do a really good impression of Walt.
You just have to channel like rocket power or something. Like it's not hard.
I don't know what that means. Rocket power?
No, it's a Nicktoon.
We're too old, Brian. We're too old.
I know. Well, with that, we should move on. We should move on to our next film, Poison. I know, Max, you've got a trailer queued up for us, so we're going to check that out, and we'll see you on the other side. All right, welcome back. That was the trailer for Poison. Max, I'm just going to pass it off to you. I know you've got a lot to say about this movie. This is one of your favorites. So tell us about Poison.
Thank you, Brian. I've been looking forward to this one for a while. We both share a deep love of Todd Haynes, and especially a lot of his fucked up films from his before he grew up, I suppose, post Far From Heaven. Although, is this your first time seeing it, Brian?
Yes, it is.
Oh, that's great. All right. So Poison is a kind of anthology film, although all three are cross-cut together. 3 shorts of about the same length. The first one called Hero, which is a mock documentary that is about a boy who shoots his father and apparently flies out the window. And we learn more by interviewing the town and put the pieces and details together. The second one is called Horror. Is a B-movie melodrama, and I actually just finally got the pun of that title, goddammit, that is in black and white and is about a mad scientist who accidentally finds the essence of sexuality and releases it upon the general public as a horrific monster. And the final one, Homo, which is 2 prisoners in 1940s prison. This was the one most influenced by Jean Genet's writings that really influenced the first few shorts of Todd Haynes, as well as the whole tone of this movie. All of this is cut together without any real connection between the 3, other than connecting the moods and connecting other very political points that the movie wants to make. It also, weirdly, for something this arty, and again, arty, art with a capital A, touched off a huge cultural war in 1991, including putting the movie in the sights of Senator Jesse Helms, who called it pornography, and because the movie took a $25,000 grant from the National Endowment for the Arts, became a big part of, should we be giving any money to the arts if they're going to make gay porn and show it to our children? So all of that's pretty ironic that the movie begins with the quote, "The whole world is dying of panicky fright."
Yeah, it's interesting to think of like what unites these 3 disparate stories, and I think it's also interesting to point out, right, as you touched on, Max, they're all cut together. They're all sort of stitched in a very heterogeneous way, if we can use the word hetero to describe this movie. But I mean, they're all right. It's all spliced together, right? So you'll start off with a little segment from the documentary, then you'll go into about 5 minutes from the horror section, which is totally styled off of like Twilight Zone or like an Orson Welles movie. It's fantastic.
Invasion of the Body Snatchers. I mean,
yeah,
it's Mystery Science Fair if you ever had it, you know?
And I wanted to point out, Max, I mean, you say he invents human sexuality, or he invents sort of like the coagulate of, you know, the serum for human sexuality. It's cum. It's
yep.
Like they describe it as like the white coagulate of like the synapses or something, and then of course they show it, and it's like a pot of cum.
I never made that connection, but I love it.
Yes, you did.
I really didn't.
Don't be coy.
See, I know, but this is like, it's some of this is just coming to me now too. It's just kind of like the middle one's called Horror, and he drinks cum. And this is like, you couldn't be more in your face about, you know, what the gay community and America had been going through with the AIDS crisis at that time than this middle film.
Actually, yeah, there's a big emphasis on secretion in this movie, which I was trying to, you know, in my notes, I was like, what is the poison? Is it desire? Is it cum? It might just be cum. Because there's that scene towards the end of Homo, the one set in the prison, where it's part of a flashback sequence, and one of the characters at a previous institution was like being bullied by the rest of the guys in the yard, and he is ordered to open his mouth and kneel while they stand at like 10 paces away and like try to spit in his open mouth. Again, the spit is cum. It's very coagulated. It's shot like a bukkake scene. He ends up with these white globs like raining down on his face.
That was definitely a connection that I did make.
Just a regular night at the jackhammer, eh, Brown?
Yeah, so I mean, that's all to say there's a lot of fluids in this movie. I mean, if you were to hazard a guess as to what either the overall connection between all of these 3 stories, which, by the way, were the stories all Jean Genet's stories, or were they just they were extrapolating from quotes from Genet plays or novels?
Just the final story, just Homo.
Okay. But so what impression did you guys have of like an overall connecting point?
Well, sex, honestly. like I said, I didn't make the connection with, obviously I was watching and I knew he had that, the whole analogy with that to me was that they had criminalized desire, basically, or lust, or homosexuality, if you will. Like they're ostracized for being different. And he even stands up and is like, you know, what is he? I wish I'd written it down, but like something about like pride is the only thing we have left or something like that. Like, that's not a direct quote. That's me misremembering it. But
you'll never know what pride is, because pride is the only thing that lets you stand up to misery.
Yes. And that made me
melodramatically.
Yes. Like I like that to me is like, that's,
it was shocking to hear the word pride used like that, or the word pride used in 1991.
Yeah. So like I said, though, that to me was, and sex, like, and you know, poison, like sexuality, I thought was sort of the poison that runs throughout. And I say poison that runs, like poison in quotation marks. Yeah, I think they were about gay panic and AIDS panic. You can feel like with the documentary stuff, you can feel like it's a trial run, right? Like you can feel far from heaven and like you can feel safe, and you can
feel... It's the direct line to Safe right after this, but also
absolutely,
Superstar right before it.
There's even a line in the Twilight Zone pastiche where his his beautifully coiffed blonde love interest says something about like, oh, well, the reason that you became disfigured by drinking the serum is because there was, let me find the quote, but she says there was an atmospheric something, right? It was like atmosphere. No, what do they call it? Environmental sickness in Safe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Atmospheric toxins changed the magnetic field, and that's what caused it to spread. Which, of course, is like, you know, it's all of like the science babble of, you know, these science fiction movies of, right, you know, the black and white era. I love like Hammer films and stuff like that. But it's also, it's totally this precursor to, you know, the ethereal, you know, discontent and toxins and paranoia of Safe. And just this idea, well, I guess that other question is, you know, for the horror one, you couldn't find a clearer AIDS allegory, right? He drinks this potion of human sexuality, again, a viscous bodily fluid, and he becomes this kind of like disfigured, like Mr. Hyde creature who is turning the rest of the population into libidinous zombies it's leprosy is what they describe it as, but I've never seen lepers dripping semen out of their face. But it's like, it's a lot of imagery in this one, folks. I'm sorry.
Maybe I can understand why it was such a controversy in 1990.
Possibly. Well, it's also, I mean, it's worth noting that these three are all shot in aesthetically very different styles, right? The first one, like you said, Max, is kind of like this grainy documentary. The second one, right, is this black and white. It's even got sort of the modulated sound, like think of Mank, the manipulation that they do to the sound there to make it sound like a tin phone or something. And then the third one is it's shot like a prison drama, and
with the dreamy, melodramatic Douglas Sirk flashbacks, you know, on top of them too. So we almost get a fourth movie for good measure.
Oh yeah, with the flashbacks within the third one
with John Leguizamo.
Yes.
What?
John Leguizamo was one of the guys that spits on him.
Oh my God.
Yeah, Matthew, to your question, you know, I think why this is a great pairing between the both of these films is that I think they're a little bit of the yin and the yang between these two great filmmakers. Was Gus Van Sant, you know, was coming from commercials, wasn't fully formed, was still finding his voice, and basically, you know, made a beat off chapbook of a movie. Whereas this one, you know, Todd Haynes was very much an art scene kid. You know, he was going to film school in California. He was getting the big grants. He was only interested in short films. You know, Brian and I have long talked about our love of Superstar, you know, because it's so hard to get your hands on. I own a DVD copy that I got from my local Laurie's Planet of Sound because that's all you could get of that for so long. Superstar is based off of the life of Karen Carpenter, and because it's so direct against the Carpenter family and uses their music without permission and a bunch of other crazy things in it, that it never got permission to ever be seen. So that kind of stayed lost, but also very well known. But that one also shared this type of environmental sickness. It treated its subject very sympathetically, her bulimia, things that, you know, people who made Karen Carpenter a joke, and how relentless the American media, you know, had been in the 70s and 80s. This one looked at it much more of like, well, fame did this. Well, fame is its own environmental sickness, and people's expectations and image and desire and so many other things. So when it comes to this film, it's really that he took 3 different shorts and kind of mashed them all together, put them in a blender, which is obviously other filmmakers had somewhat done before, but I don't think ever on this scale before. And something that'd be very influential to a lot of filmmakers moving forward, both for good things like the Wachowskis and Cloud Atlas, but also I think bad things like Crash and other films that use that type of like, great, well, we can tell a lot of different stories and then just kind of mash them up together. Except this one doesn't move off of any, of course, similar plot, other than how these images and how these things make us feel, how the mood strikes, or the specific points the movie's making. And there are quite a bit of them beyond that, of the psychosexual cycle of abuse, that really hero, that we start the movie with and we kind of end the movie with, is our main wraparound. And the way that, this child and this abused child and this weird fairy tale type of story is told in this fake documentary way. And in a way that I think that he's taking the piss out of Errol Morris more than he is like out of TV or anything else. Like there are just some shots where I'm just like, oh, he's making fun of Gates of Heaven and a bunch of other type of movies. And that's kind of great. But that I think that if there's a key to this movie, it exists in the first short and Hero.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. And I think, to the point about all of the movies that would follow that would try to do this sort of anthology approach to telling a whole handful of stories and making them come together with a central theme. The cutting and the way that these movies these stories, these like micro movies within the larger movie, the way that they all come together in such like an impressionistic quilt kind of way, it doesn't make immediate thematic, or maybe not thematic, but it doesn't make immediate narrative sense, why they're mashed together, like you said, but it does. I think it flows, right? It has a certain kind of legibility where, you jump from scene to scene, from one movie to another, and it's got this weird sense of like emotional or visual continuity that it's like, it's like the visual equivalent of listening to like a mashup album or something, where they mash, either some kind of motif or tempo. It all sort of comes together in this, this bouillabaisse, this complete like a cinematic potluck that weirdly, yeah. And I think you're right. I think the bookending of the story with the hero story, this weird enigmatic little fairy tale, couched in the sense of like this missing child. It really does feel like something principal to what is going on in the other two stories.
I agree, Matthew. I mean, it's very clear that this was all written for each other and with each other in mind. This was a very intentional Russian nesting doll. It's extraordinarily intentional, which is why I think that it retains its power today, even though it is so crazily ambiguous. Yet it's so ambiguous, yet it's so on the nose, like we were talking about, especially within our B, monster movie middle part. But that's what I think probably ignited most of the controversy of this movie more than any explicitness, or that, it put a child spanking about 5 crosscuts away from anal sex. So this was a movie that was making its points, but it offended people by its artistry. It offended people by its ideas more than it did by any of its explicitness.
Yeah, and I think maybe not even the ideas. They just saw a shot of him on his knees covered in white fluid and extrapolated from that they were going to protest this movie.
Well, I think it was famously known that Senator Jesse Helms had not seen the movie when he started the crusade against it in Washington, D.C., which, big surprise. But right. But it is, it is somewhat really a little bit baffling to me that something that was so specific and esoteric and obviously made in, the name of art would become this thing where Todd Haynes had to go on Crossfire in 1991 to explain.
I'm going to look that up.
That, that this movie was initially a critical hit, or at least Mala Noche was blocked from being in Sundance, but this one was admitted in 1991 and ended up winning the grand jury prize. There's a reason why this one is, even though there was many LGBTQ films before it, and the controversy that it generated, that this was really the starting pistol for new queer cinema. And Brian, you and I have covered so many movies over the last year and a half on that have been so great, but this was really the one that every other artist that was working at that time, every other LGBTQ artist saw and went, wow, I want that. And I also want that much attention.
I think, this is a really good pairing. Thanks to whoever put this together. Because I think it is a really good pairing. I mean, aside from just the production aspects of this being, both of these auteurs' first, real directorial debuts, I think there's something about how explicit, gay desire is in both of these movies, right? You can do a queer analysis. You can use queer as a verb. You can use queer in very academic senses to refer to a lot of, a lot of pre-80s cinema. And I mean, which is not to say that there wasn't explicit gay stuff happening before then, but there is something about these movies that is, just undeniably gay, not in a sense of camp aesthetics, not in a sense of, broad sensibilities of exclusion or otherness or anything, but like in the literal facts of gay desire. It's like you said in the Mala Noche part of our discussion, there's just something unapologetic about the way it depicts attraction and sex, and that's really present in Poison too. Even if you just take away the visual innuendos, especially the aptly named homo sequence, which is the one again set in the prison, it uses attraction in kind of this power hierarchy examination of life in the prison, but it's like undebatably gay attraction, and it's far from pornographic. There are some movies that you'll watch that sort of straddle the line between porn and art and, get you in that zone of like, okay, well, what is the real semantic difference? I wouldn't say that this is anything close to pornographic. It's just
not even erotic.
Yeah. Well,
well, it depends on how much you enjoy prison porn.
Depends. I mean, there are some scenes in the prison one that were, well, I'll leave it at that. I'll save it for the.
Well, we just got done watching Cruising, so this one is, that came 10 years before this, so this is still relatively mild.
Yeah,
it's that one in malls.
Yeah, this is far from graphic. It's very explicit about the kind of imagery that you're seeing, but you could not make the case that this is porn, like at all.
No, it's very gay though, like we said, and that is enough to rile up Republican senators. We've barely talked on the prison story, and I wanted to mention it because it's obviously based on a Jean Genet story, so it has shades of Querelle and Fassbender all over it.
Mm-hmm. The one that it made me think of the most was Claire Denis Beautrevis, right? And that these are both stories about, these like all male institutions where sort of homoerotic attraction or homoerotic tension is sort of used as a translator for these other sort of facets of male bonding or male relation. In Beautrevis, it was about sort of homoerotic tension being this facilitator for, or this recognizable language for these outdated modes of male intimacy and male bonding that only existed in this military context and are, rapidly disappearing as the Foreign Legion in the movie loses its mandate and there's like no real reason for it to be there anymore. And so there's this competition between two sort of like ideal soldiers, one who's been the ideal soldier for a long time, a newbie on the scene and sort of vying for the affections and implied attractions of their commanding officer. And in Poison, the prison story is much more about sort of Eros as this this language for hierarchies within the prison, the social hierarchy, which really culminates in this ending scene where the main character tops the guy that he's been chasing in the prison, and it's sort of like an ahaha, I win because I topped you, and the guy's like, well, I did the same to you. And he's like, yeah, well, I shot up your butt, so I like win in the machismo contest. And it's like it's like a humiliation and an eros. Like it's
very Billy Budd. It's very, all of this is a Freudian psychosexual nightmare.
So that's why I thought of Beautrevis, because it's like it's male to male intimacy and specifically male to male attraction being used as this like weird facilitator for like a different kind of social relationship that is really kind of divorced from romance or like actual intimacy. There is some yearning in that story. There is like some authentic desire, I think, but the larger structure is about who is at the top of the food chain in the prison.
Oh man, Matthew, my stoner brain just remembered that Beautrevis is Billy Budd, by the way, too.
Well, and I will relate everything back to Beautrevis because it has the best ending scene in all of cinema. So
I've never seen it, so
Oh, definitely. We'll cover that by next Pride,
Oh yeah.
hell or high water, Brian.
Okay.
Well, Matthew, I wanted to circle back to your question of what does this title mean? So, poison really can be two things, both kind of thumbing its nose at the thought that it's this poison in the blood, that it's all of these gays and lesbians that have spread this disease throughout the land, and really takes the mindset of the second movie, horror, or it can be our second and our first and third movies, where it's more of all of the abuse, all of the bigotry, all of society's problems have infected these people to act out in this way. And yet they are the ones that are more free, even if they are missing or in jail. But talk about GOP cancel culture, though, too. Right. Whether they could not understand it or that there was bare buttocks or anything else, they just really couldn't handle their delicate sensibilities, could they?
Yeah, except they probably never saw it.
Well, yeah, and that's my question is I want to know how it was described even. What was the elevator pitch they got?
Who knows? Well, probably just that it was a queer filmmaker had been given government money to make a movie. A, that probably would have been enough. And then B, they thought the movie was pornography.
Well, and remember, this is before the internet. This is before a lot of home video. Obviously, you're not going to be able to find this on a VHS copy anywhere like soon afterwards. So I really think it became this like, GOP scare, campfire story. And they just kept adding more and more things to it. So it just became this big, scary, pornographic art house, thing where it's obviously not, or that's not what the movie's intending in any way whatsoever. So it just became this weird, Republican game of telephone. Before they were just like, we got to ban it, or we got to like ban all government spending on these type of movies. I did find one quote in a New York Times article from a senator that was unattributed, but apparently on the Senate floor, there was discussion about Todd Haynes being the Fellini of fellatio, which I appreciate that alliterativeness.
Oh my God, that is, yeah, I want that on a placard. Holy shit.
But again, if you were a young artist at this time, wouldn't you want this type of notoriety? I mean, like, this is like fucking free press. This is, it's not what Todd Haynes wanted, obviously, because he was just looking for more grants for more of his already short films rather than, to take up the cause. But I do think that it's pretty interesting to look that this movie came out the same time as Paris is Burning, both at the Sundance Film Festival. But both of those movies made such a big impact that the very next festival had more queer films than ever, including Greg Araki's The Living End, but also Swoon and Hours and Times. Go Fish was soon the year after that. So again, even if Todd Haynes didn't want to chase this notoriety, didn't want to become the poster bad boy, because Greg Araki very obviously did right after, it paved the way immediately for people who were paying attention and could go, oh God, I can do that on a pretty cheap budget too.
Well, it's funny, Max, that you say that the intention was not right to play into this sort of gay panic thing, because now that I'm thinking of it, and I only just had this thought now, all of the three narratives seem to be playing off a particular kind of gay panic narrative, right? And of course, the movie prefacing all three of the stories with there's what was the quote? It's like there is a panic in the air or something, something to the effect of panic.
Yeah, the whole world is dying of panicky fright.
Yes. And so all three of these narratives, right, they're different iterations of these sort of culturally replicated fears about homosexuality, right? The horror one is obviously AIDS, right? And the idea that sexuality can somehow it can transmit this debilitating disease that will infect, the public and turn them into leper zombies. The homo one, the prison one, I mean, it's about prison rape. It's something that is, popularized in movies to the point of being a joke, but also kind of like this ongoing like panic joke about what homosexuality is. It's something that happens in prisons. You go to prison, you turn gay because somebody rapes you. And the first story too is about sort of the corrupting influence of this kid who has these deviant sexual ideas sort of thrust upon him at a young age, and he goes crazy and he kills his father, right? Which is not to say that all of those three stories are replicating those panics, but they're like playing with those cultural narratives, right? They're all like things that you would recognize as GOP talking point, right? So it's like part of me now wonders, was it an intentional, not a thumb at the nose to the GOP specifically, but was it an intentional rewriting of those cultural narratives of gay panic?
I won't go on another rant here, but it absolutely 100% was, because Todd Haynes is that cerebral of a person. But it was also because he was working with a lot of activists around this time too. And as part of a group called Grand Fury. So they were very specific about their intentions and very anti-GOP. And again, we're about to see the Clinton revolution just on the horizon here. From 1992 into the Gingrich Revolution of '94, so they're already, unfortunately, being very prescient about a lot more of the anti-gay work to come.
Yeah, I agree. To answer your question, yes, I think it is absolutely that. Because, like Max said, he is that cerebral of a person. What I find interesting, looking at these two films together, I find that I appreciate Mala Noche sort of more as a curiosity from a filmmaker that I'm a fan of than a film on its own, whereas Poison I absolutely loved and on its own terms. And I just, like I said, something that I was thinking about in talking about these two films together.
It's always nice when a movie lives up to its reputation, right, Brian? Especially one as controversial as this. And we just covered the controversy of Cruising and Basic Instinct. So I think we're rounding out a lot of our killer queer films already.
Yeah. Speaking of Todd Haynes, I know we've talked about this before, but Todd Haynes did that film Dark Waters. With Mark Ruffalo, which is that environmental disaster movie that I haven't seen. I have it in my iTunes, but I've never seen it. But now I'm kind of with all of that other stuff we've just been talking about in mind, I'm excited to I've kind of just been putting off watching it. But I do want to pair it with that Gus Van Sant, Matt Damon movie where he does an environmental disaster movie like Promised Land with John Krasinski. Because first of all, they're both queer filmmakers doing these sort of Oscar baity seeming environmental disaster movies, like a Civil Action or whatever, lawyer movies where
it's interesting you brought it up, Brian, that it took him that long maybe to go back to a lot of his roots. I feel kind of post Far From Heaven, he got very stuck in the melodrama and the Cirque age, give or take I'm Not There. But, again, I think I brought this up at the beginning of this section, but it's funny how both of these men's careers went. I think Gus Van Sant got more arty as he got older, even with his back to Hollywood phase in the late 90s. But Todd Haynes got more commercial and Hollywood friendly as he went along and dropped a lot more of the explicit politics. I think that more of his movies become apolitical as they go along, whereas this one might just be his most political.
I think it's definitely his most political, but I wouldn't say that Far From Heaven or Carol, for example, are apolitical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think by the time that he got to Safe and Far From Heaven, he was much more comfortable in establishing a long-form movie about his obsessions or more of his pastiche, which, again, his obsessions of 60s melodramas and gauzy 70s specials and things remain, through the rest of his career. But it is so interesting to see all of these styles so well developed with such a low budget so early on. It really is a mark of somebody with a complete vision.
Absolutely, yeah.
And that's the most pretentious thing I think I've said out of this episode, which is saying something.
But Todd Haynes has a film he's working on. I think it's probably coming out next, I would say next Oscar season-ish, 22, but with Natalie Portman and Julianne Moore.
Yes, looking forward to it. Maybe anthology films will become, more the norm again outside of the horror market. Wes Anderson's premiering his first one this Cannes Film Festival, so we'll see if that one's a hit for him.
Oh, I'm sure it will be. They all love Wes Anderson.
Yeah,
especially his live action stuff.
I do, Matthew, but I wanted you to go first.
Why don't you go first?
Oh, right. No, I was just talking with both of you guys over the break, but when we were wrapping up our conversation about Mala Noche, I had to admit where I probably shared way too much in common with Walt as a precocious young man, but once accidentally did pick up a hustler in Madrid without speaking a word of Spanish. But I was 20 years old at the time, so I just thought that I was cute, and it was my sparkling personality, of course.
Yeah, I'm finding it hard to come up with say something gay about.
Yeah, there's nothing very sexy about either one of these films. I honestly I think if I'm going not sexy gay but stereotypically gay, I really loved all the 80s outfits in the documentary.
Yes.
I was like, oh, I could have grown up there. It looked so familiar.
And some side ponytails too.
Yeah.
I have to say something wholly unrelated. If feel free to cut this if you want. But ever since who brought up Taxi Driver when we were talking about misanthropes? Was that Max?
Okay.
You mentioned Taxi Driver. I've been thinking of the iconic social phenomenon that is Paul Schrader's Facebook page. Have y'all seen this? It's the best thing on the internet. Paul Schrader will just post like his every random thought onto his Facebook page, and it's a total like grandpa Facebook page. But he'll also say like he'll say stuff that you're like, you should really be in trouble for this, and he gets dragged over the coals pretty much every day, because he'll say something ridiculous like, well, just got kicked out of my third virtual poker group because I said that the woman who was sitting to my right was too gorgeous to not have a girlfriend, not to have a boyfriend. It's like, it's just fantastic to watch.
Cringe boomer, then, right?
Oh my god, absolutely! But he's just generating these fantastically bizarre takes that are like somewhat neutered, I think, in their awfulness by the fact that he's just kind of an insane old man. It's just so strange, but this is
how he can go from directing First Reform back to directing like Lindsay Lohan again. The man has no chill.
Did you see First Reformed?
He'll post.
First Reformed is great.
Oh, I hated it because it felt very
Paul Schradery,
and I just wasn't. I'm like, and he's like redeemed at the end by like Amanda Seyfried, and like I'm just like, fuck this whole movie.
It does.
He will never give up the Catholic obsession.
Getting some insight into this man's like sort of every passing thought does kind of color his movies a little bit. He like recently posted something like, and it's like, dude, you just get a diary. Like, you don't need to broadcast this to the world. Like he posted something about like, oh, I had a dream the other day. It was really bizarre, in which I was like sexually harassing an actress on the set. And it's like, why do you feel the need to share this with your devoted fans? Anyway, that's my say something.
You know what? Both of these movies are so gay, we had to say something straight about it.
If my threshold for say something straight is talking about Paul Schrader's Facebook page, then I don't know.
Well, that's still pretty gay, Matthew, if I'm being honest. But I liked it.
Very, very, very niche. Well,
perfect for a film podcast, right, Brian?
I know, right? Well, exactly. Yeah, we're not doing this for money.
So, well, that brings a close to Pride Month.
I know. There we go. That's perfect. Happy Pride to you both. Thank you so much for joining me, Max, in particular. You've been my de facto co-host this whole month.
Thank you. I like being a guest host. I will be I'll be your Andy Richter. Okay, I'm happy to be your Andy Richter, Brian.
Perfect. Well, Andy, do you want to hit us with your social media?
Sure. People can find me. I'm at Max Bever on Instagram.
Matthew?
I am at RatJacko on Letterboxd and Twitter.
Excellent. Thank you. I am so Brian Rowe. That's Brian with an I. ROWE on Instagram, Twitter, and Letterboxd. You can find the podcast at Piece of Pie Pod, also on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and YouTube. Give us a like, give us a subscribe. Thank you so much for listening. Happy Pride, and we'll see you in a few weeks with another pairing. In the meantime,
just go to movies. Go to any movie theater. It's great again.
You know that it's been a long time, because when I went to go see In the Heights at the pre-show, the progressive ad that was playing before was absolutely lighting up the theater. People were like laughing their asses off, and I was like, this is the sound of a deprived.
We're ready for commercials again.
So funny.
People were loving Flow. It was an electric atmosphere.
Yeah. But yeah, we're still rambling. Unless Max has cut us off, in which case we're not. But anyway, happy Pride. We'll see you next time.
Happy Pride.